Darius Coleman thought hard work would be enough. At Riverbend Plastics, he kept his head down, working overtime to feed his family. But when his manager, Victor Hale, framed him for theft and provoked him into one angry mistake, a factory dispute became a courtroom battle. The charges were dropped, but the damage was done. Jobless, shamed, and watched by a world quick to judge a black man, Darius faced a harder fight, clearing his name and protecting his family from prejudice designed to break them. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Cleveland, Ohio, carried the quiet heaviness of late autumn. A gray sky pressed low over the smokestacks, and the wind off Lake Erie slipped through the streets like a reminder that winter was close. The city moved with a tired rhythm. Freight trains in the distance, factory whistles cutting through the cold, streetlights flickering on before the sun had fully surrendered. It was the kind of evening where breath turned to fog, and men pulled their jackets tighter before stepping into another long shift. Darius Coleman was one of those men. At 32, Darius stood just over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered from years of manual labor, his build strong but lean rather than bulky. His skin was a deep brown that caught the light with quiet warmth, and his face carried sharp cheekbones and steady dark eyes that rarely revealed how much he was carrying inside. He kept his hair cropped close, practical and neat, and wore the same steel-toe boots he had owned for 3 years, scuffed, dependable, just like him. There was a calmness about Darius that people often misunderstood. He spoke softly, moved deliberately, and listened more than he talked. Growing up in a neighborhood where anger was often met with consequences, he had learned early that control was survival. His father, a dock worker who passed away when Darius was 19, had once told him, "Strength ain't about loud, it's about lasting." That sentence had shaped him more than any school lesson ever could. Riverbend Plastics rose beside the Cuyahoga River like a concrete fortress, its walls stained by decades of industry. Inside, machines thundered nonstop, molding and stamping plastic components for automotive suppliers across the Midwest. The air smelled faintly of heated resin and oil. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady. Darius operated an injection molding machine on the night shift. His hands moved with precision, checking pressure gauges, trimming excess material, stacking finished parts onto pallets. He rarely complained about overtime. Every extra hour meant groceries, school supplies, rent. Every extra hour meant stability. At home, stability depended on him. Monica Coleman, his wife, was 30 years old, tall and slender with warm, caramel-brown skin and intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to study the world carefully before trusting it. Her long black hair was usually tied back in a low ponytail, practical for long days. She had once dreamed of becoming a nurse, but life had rerouted her plans when Jaden was born earlier than expected. Monica was gentle in voice, but firm in spirit. She had grown up watching her mother juggle 2 jobs, and resilience had settled into her bones. Recently, Monica had started a small food stall at the West Side Market. She sold homemade cornbread, sweet potato pies, and warm cups of seasoned rice and beans prepared before dawn. The stall was modest. Just a folding table, a banner she had printed herself, and a cooler, but she treated it like a storefront on Main Street. She greeted every customer with the same dignity, even when sales were slow. Pride, to Monica, was not about income. It was about effort. Their oldest child, Jaden Coleman, was 10 years old and already tall for his age, with his father's steady gaze and his mother's thoughtful silence. His skin was a lighter brown than Darius's, and he wore his hair in short curls that he constantly brushed back when nervous. Jaden excelled in math and reading, often staying up past bedtime to finish library books. But recently, he had started asking questions about money, questions children shouldn't have to ask. "Dad, are we okay?" he had whispered one night after overhearing a conversation about bills. Darius had smiled, the kind of smile fathers use when the truth is heavier than comfort. "We're working on it, son." Lila Coleman, 6 years old, had inherited Monica's warmth. Small and energetic, with bright brown eyes and braided pigtails, she carried laughter into rooms that needed it. She loved drawing houses with large windows and smiling stick figures inside. In her pictures, the sun was always shining. The youngest, Noah, only 3, was round-cheeked and curious, following his siblings like a shadow. He spoke in half-formed sentences and believed his father could fix anything. From broken toys to scraped knees to thunder outside the window, Darius carried their faces with him every night. Inside the factory, most workers respected him. He showed up early, left late, and never cut corners. If someone needed help lifting a mold plate or clearing a jammed conveyor, Darius was there before they finished asking. But not everyone saw him the same way. Victor Hale, the production manager for the night shift, was 48 years old, tall but slightly stooped from years behind a desk rather than on a line. His pale skin flushed easily when irritated, and his thinning sandy hair was combed carefully over a widening bald spot. He wore crisp button-down shirts under a company-issued jacket, as if the factory were a corporate office instead of a loud industrial floor. His blue eyes were sharp and restless, always scanning for mistakes. Victor valued control above all else. He believed discipline came from fear, not respect. Raised in a household where authority was never questioned, he had carried that philosophy into management. To him, workers were replaceable parts, useful but disposable, and toward Darius, his scrutiny was sharper. "Clock in on time, Coleman?" Victor would say, though Darius was never late. "Don't get comfortable just because you're popular," he once muttered, glancing at the other workers who laughed at something Darius had said. The comments were subtle enough to avoid complaint, but sharp enough to wound. One person noticed. Ethan Brooks worked 2 stations down from Darius. At 29, Ethan was lean and slightly shorter, with sandy brown hair and a quiet demeanor. He wore rectangular glasses that constantly slid down his nose, giving him the appearance of someone more academic than industrial. Ethan had studied mechanical engineering for 2 years before family finances forced him into full-time work. Observant by nature, he saw patterns others missed. Ethan respected Darius, not because he was strong, but because he was steady. One night, as they wiped down their machines, Ethan leaned closer and said quietly, "You ever notice Hale only double-checks your pallets?" Darius shrugged. "Maybe he just likes my face." Ethan didn't smile. "It ain't that." Darius knew it wasn't, but acknowledging it out loud would make it real. At home, Monica counted cash from the day's sales. Some days were good, others barely covered ingredients. She had overheard 2 women whispering, glancing at her wedding ring, asking why her husband didn't move up if he worked so much. She kept smiling anyway. Jaden's teacher had recently suggested a gifted program, one that required a small participation fee. Monica folded the pamphlet carefully and placed it on the kitchen counter, unsure how to bring it up. Back at Riverbend Plastics, rumors floated through the break room like smoke. A shipment discrepancy. Missing inventory. Someone had mentioned theft. Victor's voice carried over the hum of machines later that week. "We're short on components. Thousands of dollars short," he announced during shift briefing, arms crossed. "And I intend to find out why." His gaze lingered. Not long enough to accuse, but long enough to imply. Darius felt it. Ethan felt it too. Outside, wind rattled the factory windows. Inside, tension settled like dust no one could sweep away. When the shift ended near dawn, Darius stepped into the cold Cleveland air, shoulders heavy but posture straight. The city was quiet. Streetlights flickered off as the sky turned pale. He didn't know that seeds had already been planted against him. He only knew he had another shift tomorrow, and another bill to pay. The night shift at Riverbend Plastics continued, machines roaring, suspicions brewing, and a man doing everything he could to hold his world together, unaware that someone above him was already measuring where to strike. The rumors that had drifted through Riverbend Plastics the week before hardened into something heavier by Tuesday night. The air inside the factory felt tighter, as if even the machines sensed trouble. Pallets were counted twice. Clipboards appeared in supervisors' hands. Conversations stopped when management walked by. Darius noticed it, but he stayed focused on his station. His movements were steady, measured. He had learned that when tension rose, the safest place for a man like him was inside his own work. Near midnight, the production line halted abruptly. The sudden silence was unnatural. Without the roar of molding presses, every cough and shuffle echoed. Victor Hale stepped onto the floor with deliberate calm. His expression was controlled, but his eyes held something sharper, almost eager. 2 security guards followed him. One was Carl Renshaw, a broad man in his early 40s with a shaved head and thick forearms, the kind of former high school linebacker who carried authority through sheer size. Carl rarely smiled and followed orders without question. Beside him stood Miguel Torres, younger, mid-20s, lean and quiet, his dark hair tied back neatly. Miguel's posture suggested discomfort rather than aggression. He had grown up in a working-class Latino family and understood what factory life meant to people. Victor cleared his throat. "We've confirmed a major inventory loss. Several crates of specialty polymer components are missing, worth tens of thousands." Workers exchanged looks. Ethan Brooks froze 2 stations away from Darius, adjusting his glasses nervously. Victor's gaze shifted slowly across the room before settling. "And we have reason to believe someone on this shift is responsible." No name yet, just pressure. Darius wiped his hands on a cloth and met Victor's stare without defiance, without apology. Victor took a step closer. "Coleman," he said finally, voice smooth but edged with accusation. "You were logged near storage 3 times this week. Care to explain?" Darius felt heat rise in his chest. "I was covering a jam on line 4. You know that." Victor's lips tightened. "Convenient," murmurs began. The word theft traveled like a spark. Ethan stepped forward slightly. "He was helping maintenance that night," he said quietly. Victor shot him a warning look. "I don't recall asking for commentary." The humiliation was not in the accusation itself, it was in the tone. The way Victor spoke as if guilt were already decided. The way he allowed silence to become suspicion. "Search the lockers," Victor ordered. Carl moved first, heavy boots thudding against concrete. Miguel followed more slowly. Darius stood still as they reached his locker. His heart pounded, but his face remained composed. He had nothing to hide. Carl yanked the metal door open. For a moment there was nothing unusual. An extra shirt, a lunch container, worn gloves. Then Carl crouched, reached deeper behind the bottom shelf, and pulled out a sealed plastic package stamped with Riverbend inventory codes. The room went quiet. Darius blinked once. "That's not mine." Victor stepped forward, inspecting the label as if confirming a theory. "Funny how it found its way into your locker." Ethan's brow furrowed. He had seen Darius pack that locker hundreds of times. There had never been space behind the shelf. It was bolted tight. "You planted that," Darius said, his voice low but steady. Victor's expression hardened. "Careful." Something in the air shifted. Years of swallowed remarks. Years of being watched more closely than others. Years of proving himself twice over. "Careful?" Darius repeated. "You've been watching me since I got here. You wanted this." Victor stepped closer, invading space deliberately. "You people always play victim." The words were quiet, almost whispered, but they landed like a slap. For a split second, Darius saw not the factory floor, but his father's tired eyes. Monica counting bills at the kitchen table, Jaden asking if they were okay. He felt something inside him snap. Not rage, but something wounded deeper. His fist moved before thought could catch it. The punch landed square against Victor's jaw. Not wild, not repeated. One clean strike fueled by humiliation and restraint finally breaking. Victor stumbled backward, crashing into a pallet. Gasps filled the room. Carl lunged forward, grabbing Darius by the arms. Miguel hesitated before assisting, his grip less forceful. "Stand down," Carl barked. Darius did not resist further. His chest rose and fell heavily, but his eyes were clear. Victor pressed a hand to his jaw, fury replacing calculation. "Call the police." The word echoed louder than the machines ever had. Within 20 minutes, Cleveland police officers entered the factory. Officer Raymond Collins led the response, a tall white man in his late 30s with a square jaw and clipped speech. He carried himself with procedural efficiency, neither overtly hostile nor sympathetic. Behind him walked Officer Dana Whitaker, a black woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and composed posture. Her expression suggested she had seen this scene before in different forms. Statements were taken. Victor exaggerated the blow, describing it as a violent assault. He mentioned feeling dizzy. He mentioned fear for his safety. Darius was placed in handcuffs. The metal felt colder than the night air outside. Ethan tried to speak again. "There are cameras in storage," he said. "You should check." Officer Collins cut him off. "We'll handle the investigation." As Darius was escorted past the rows of machines, workers avoided his gaze. Not out of judgment, out of fear. Outside, snow flurries had begun to fall. At the police station, Darius sat in a holding room beneath fluorescent lights. He answered questions calmly. He admitted to striking Victor. He denied theft. Back at home, Monica's phone rang close to 2 a.m. The officer who called spoke in neutral tones. Monica listened without interrupting, her knuckles whitening around the phone. After hanging up, she stood in the kitchen for a long moment before waking Jaden. Jaden appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Mom?" She forced steadiness into her voice. "Your dad's going to be okay." But news travels fast in working-class neighborhoods. By morning, whispers had already begun. Monica spent the next day calling relatives and scraping together money for bail and legal counsel. Pride had no place now. She visited Angela Morris, a childhood friend who ran a hair salon 2 blocks away. Angela was curvy, outspoken, and fiercely loyal, with honey blonde highlights and a laugh that usually filled rooms. Today, she handed Monica an envelope without hesitation. "Pay me back when you can." They hired Thomas Grady, a defense attorney recommended for being affordable. Grady was in his late 50s, slightly overweight, with thinning gray hair and tired eyes behind rimless glasses. His suit looked expensive, but worn at the cuffs. He spoke smoothly, confidently, but there was something distant in his manner, as if this were just another file in a long stack. "We'll negotiate," Grady said. "Assault charges are manageable. The theft? Well, that complicates things." Monica noticed he did not ask many questions about how the package ended up in the locker. At school, Jaden overheard 2 boys whispering near the lockers. "My dad says he stole from work. Guess that's why they live where they do." Jaden's ears burned. He walked past without responding, but the words stayed. Back at Riverbend Plastics, Victor left early for medical evaluation. By afternoon, rumors inflated the injury. Some said he had a fractured jaw. Others claimed a concussion. Ethan remained unsettled. During cleanup, he walked past storage again. Something about the shelf behind Darius's locker nagged at him. He crouched briefly when no one watched. The bolts looked freshly loosened. He stood slowly. This was not random. That night, Darius was formally charged with assault and theft of company property. Bail was set high enough to sting, but not impossible. Monica paid it with borrowed money. As Darius stepped out of the station, snow coating the sidewalk lightly, he looked at his wife with quiet apology. "I shouldn't have hit him," he said. Monica touched his face gently. "You're human." He nodded, but inside he felt the weight of something larger forming, something planned. Behind them, the city moved on as if nothing had happened, but inside Riverbend Plastics, a narrative had been written, and Darius Coleman had just been placed inside it. The courthouse in downtown Cleveland stood cold and square against a pale winter sky. Snow had melted into gray slush along the sidewalks, and wind funneled between the stone buildings like a warning no one could quite interpret. Inside courtroom 4B, fluorescent lights hummed softly above rows of wooden benches, polished by decades of anxious hands. Darius Coleman sat beside his attorney, Thomas Grady, wearing a borrowed navy suit that hung slightly loose across his broad shoulders. The handcuffs were gone, but the weight of accusation remained. His face was composed, dark eyes steady, though exhaustion carved faint shadows beneath them. He had not slept much since the arrest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his children's faces and heard Victor's voice echoing across the factory floor. Monica sat behind him in the gallery. She wore a simple gray coat and held her purse tightly in her lap. Her posture was straight, but her fingers trembled slightly. There were new lines near her eyes that had not been there a month ago. She had always been strong in quiet ways, but this was public, and public battles had a way of bruising pride. Thomas Grady leaned closer to Darius before proceedings began. "We'll aim for reduced consequences," he murmured. His voice was calm, almost detached. Grady had practiced law for over 30 years. He was known for settling quickly rather than fighting fiercely. Once, early in his career, he had tried a high-profile case and lost spectacularly. The public embarrassment had shifted something in him. Since then, he preferred safe exits over risky victories. At the bench sat Judge Eleanor Whitmore, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair cut neatly at chin length and sharp gray eyes that missed little. She carried herself with disciplined authority, the kind that came from decades of courtroom experience. Her rulings were known to be firm but fair. Victor Hale entered shortly after, his jaw lightly bandaged, though the swelling had mostly faded. He walked with exaggerated stiffness, as though still nursing a significant injury. His eyes avoided Darius at first, then flicked toward him with calculated coolness. The prosecutor presented the case briskly. Assault, workplace violence, theft of company property. The evidence, the recovered polymer package, was introduced. Victor described feeling threatened and attacked without warning. He spoke carefully, choosing words that painted Darius as volatile. When it was Darius's turn to speak, he stood tall. "I hit him," he said plainly. "I shouldn't have, but I did not steal anything." The courtroom remained quiet. Judge Whitmore reviewed the statements and documentation. The theft charge carried weight because of the physical evidence. The assault was undeniable. After deliberation, she delivered her decision. For the assault charge, the court finds the defendant guilty. For the theft, pending further review of company evidence, the charge stands at this time. The defendant is sentenced to a short custodial term and probation. The words landed like falling concrete. Monica closed her eyes briefly. Jayden, seated beside her, stared straight ahead, jaw tight. He had insisted on coming, though Monica had wanted to shield him. Darius nodded once. He had expected little mercy. 3 days later, something shifted. Victor Hale filed paperwork through his attorney to withdraw his complaint related to the assault, citing a desire to move forward without prolonged legal conflict. The prosecution reassessed the theft case in light of the withdrawn cooperation. Without Victor's continued testimony and with limited independent verification, the charges were reevaluated. The custodial term was cut short. Darius was released. On paper, it appeared almost merciful. In reality, it felt surgical. When Darius stepped out of the correctional facility after 72 hours, Snow had begun falling again. The air was sharp, almost cleansing. Monica stood waiting, her coat dusted white. She did not run to him. She walked steadily, dignity intact, and embraced him tightly. "It's over," she whispered. Darius looked past her toward the city skyline. "No," he said quietly, "it's not." At Riverbend Plastics, HR processed his termination within hours of the conviction record. Even though the assault complaint was withdrawn, the documentation remained. Company policy cited workplace violence and integrity concerns. The language was sterile, impersonal. Victor did not have to lift a finger. At the West Side Market, Monica began noticing the difference almost immediately. Customers who once smiled lingered less. A woman who regularly bought sweet potato pies now avoided eye contact. Another vendor across the aisle, a middle-aged man named Leonard Fisk, a tall, wiry butcher with a thick mustache and a habit of speaking too loudly, leaned over one afternoon and said, "Heard about your husband. Rough situation." His tone held sympathy, but also distance. Monica smiled politely. "We're managing." Sales declined steadily. Word spread faster than truth. At home, bills gathered on the kitchen table like silent witnesses. Jaden stopped asking questions. Instead, he grew quieter. One evening, Monica found him sitting on his bed staring at his school backpack. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. "They sent another notice," he said without looking up. "About the program fee." Monica knelt beside him. "We'll figure it out." Jaden shook his head. "Kids were talking again today. I don't want to go tomorrow." His shoulders, once squared with pride, slumped inward. Across town, Ethan Brooks returned to work under a cloud of tension. Management had implemented new oversight protocols. Storage areas were restricted. Surveillance checks increased. Ethan couldn't shake the image of the loosened bolts behind Darius's locker. Late one evening, while finishing paperwork near the administrative hallway, Ethan paused when he heard voices inside a partially closed office door. Victor Hale stood inside, speaking in low tones to Carl Renshaw, the security guard. Carl leaned against a filing cabinet, arms crossed. His expression was uneasy. It played out exactly how it needed to. Victor said, voice calm. 3 days was enough. Now he carries it forever. Carl shifted. "You sure this won't come back?" Victor's lips curved slightly. "It was clean. And without my complaint, there's nothing to pursue." "Perfect pressure." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He stepped back quietly before being seen. The phrase echoed in his mind. Perfect pressure. Darius spent his first morning home sitting at the kitchen table long after Monica left for the market. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, illuminating dust particles in the air. His hands rested flat on the wood surface. He understood now. Prison would have been temporary. A conviction record, even with withdrawn charges, was permanent enough. Employers would see it. Insurance companies would see it. Neighbors would hear about it. Victor had not wanted to lock him away. He had wanted him marked. Monica returned that afternoon with fewer empty containers than usual. She placed her apron down slowly. "It's getting harder," she admitted. Darius nodded. "I know." There was no anger in his voice now, only clarity. Later that evening, Jaden approached him hesitantly. "Dad, do you still have a job?" Darius paused. Honesty felt heavier than silence. "Not right now." Jaden swallowed. "It's because of what happened." "Yes." The boy nodded once, absorbing it quietly. Childhood shifted slightly in that moment. Across town, Ethan sat in his small apartment reviewing what little he had observed. He was not impulsive by nature, but injustice unsettled him deeply. His father had once lost a job after reporting safety violations, and the memory of watching that unravel had stayed with him. Ethan stared at his phone, debating whether to act. At Riverbend Plastics, Victor walked the factory floor with renewed confidence. Workers avoided his eyes. Authority had been reinforced. But beneath the calm surface, threads were tightening. Darius stepped outside that night, the cold biting at his face. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked a short distance down the block. He looked up at the Cleveland skyline, industrial lights glowing faintly through winter haze. This had not been about justice. It had been about control, and for the first time since the arrest, Darius felt something different from anger or shame. He felt awareness. The verdict had come. The complaint had been withdrawn. He was free. But his name carried a shadow now. And somewhere inside Riverbend Plastics, a man believed the plan had worked perfectly. The mornings in Cleveland grew colder as December settled in fully. Frost clung to parked cars, and the sky seemed permanently washed in pale gray. The city felt slower, heavier, as if burdened by its own winter. Inside the Coleman home, the heater rattled unevenly, working harder than it should. Darius woke before dawn each day just as he had when he was employed. He still put on his steel-toe boots. He still buttoned his worn work shirt. The only difference was the absence of the Riverbend Plastics logo patch he had carefully removed from the chest pocket. He left the house at the same time, kissed Monica on the forehead the same way, and told the children, "See you tonight." But he was not going to work. He walked. Some mornings he headed toward industrial parks near the river, where warehouses advertised now hiring signs that disappeared as soon as applications mentioned prior charges. Other days he rode the bus downtown, sitting quietly among commuters with lunchboxes and briefcases, pretending he belonged to that rhythm. The first rejection had been polite. A logistics supervisor named Harold Green, a middle-aged black man with salt-and-pepper hair and tired but kind eyes, had reviewed Darius's application carefully. Harold had once worked his way up from dock loader to supervisor and understood struggle. "You're qualified," Harold had said, tapping the paper gently. "But with this recent record, my hands are tied." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The second rejection had been shorter. A young HR assistant at a packaging plant glanced at the background check and slid the folder back across the desk without meeting his eyes. By the third week, Darius stopped expecting callbacks. He spent afternoons at the public library filling out online applications. The librarian on duty misses. Clara Benson was a thin, elderly white woman with neatly pinned white curls and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose. She had worked at that branch for over 30 years and believed deeply in quiet kindness. She noticed Darius returning every day. "Job search?" she asked once gently. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded, offering no judgment, only a soft, understanding smile. At home, Monica continued rising at 4 a.m. to prepare food for her stall. Her hands moved faster now, stretching ingredients further, measuring carefully. Sales had declined steadily. Some regulars still came, but whispers followed her like shadows. One afternoon, a woman she recognized approached the table but did not stop. "I heard about your husband," the woman muttered under her breath. Monica stood taller. "You heard part of it." The woman hesitated, then walked away. Monica felt humiliation burn behind her eyes, but refused to cry in public. She had grown up watching her own mother endure similar looks when her father had been wrongly accused of shoplifting years ago. That experience had shaped Monica's resilience. She had learned early that public opinion could be cruel and short-sighted. At home, Lila sat at the kitchen table coloring while Noah pushed toy trucks across the floor. Lila's braids bounced as she looked up one afternoon. "Daddy," she asked innocently, "why don't you wear your blue shirt anymore?" Darius paused. The question was gentle, without accusation. "I'm working somewhere else for a while," he replied. She nodded slowly, satisfied for now. Children accepted what they were given, until they sensed otherwise. Jaden sensed it. He had stopped asking direct questions. Instead, he observed. He noticed his father's boots were cleaner at night than they used to be. He noticed the envelope marked "Final Notice," tucked partly under a stack of mail. When a reminder from school about the gifted program fee arrived again, Jaden quietly placed it back in his backpack without mentioning it. "I don't think I want to do it anymore," he told his teacher the next day. Across town at Riverbend Plastics, the factory floor carried on, but tension simmered beneath the surface. Ethan Brooks had not forgotten what he overheard between Victor and Carl. The phrase, "perfect pressure," replayed in his mind constantly. He had always been cautious by nature, analytical rather than impulsive, but injustice had begun to outweigh fear. Late one night after his shift, Ethan lingered near the security office. The room was modest, lined with monitors displaying different angles of the warehouse, storage area, and employee lockers. Carl Renshaw was not present that evening. Instead, Miguel Torres sat alone at the desk, reviewing incident reports. Miguel looked up as Ethan approached. "Forgot something?" "Yeah," Ethan said casually. "Left my thermos somewhere." Miguel nodded absently and returned to his paperwork. Ethan's eyes flicked toward the recording system interface. He had once taken a computer repair course and understood basic data structures. He knew footage was archived on an internal server with weekly backups. Over the next few days, Ethan devised a plan. During a scheduled maintenance check on one of the monitoring units, a task he volunteered for, he discreetly connected a small flash drive to a secondary port. He did not copy everything, only specific dates, storage area cameras, locker corridor footage. His hands trembled slightly as files transferred. He was not certain what he would find. Meanwhile, Victor Hale's confidence grew sharper. Without Darius present, he moved more freely through the factory, but his control did not end with Darius. There was Sarah Whitman, a quality control technician in her late 20s. Sarah was tall and slender with pale skin, long straight blonde hair usually tied in a low ponytail, and green eyes that once carried optimism. She had joined Riverbend 2 years earlier after leaving a retail job that had left her financially unstable. Independent by nature, she prided herself on self-sufficiency. Recently, Victor had begun calling her into his office for performance discussions. The first few were harmless enough. Then the tone shifted. One evening, he closed the office door behind her. "You're doing well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But there are complaints." Sarah frowned. "About what?" Victor opened a drawer slowly and pulled out a small black device, no larger than a pen. "Security enhancement," he explained casually. "You'd be surprised what gets recorded in break rooms." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "I'm sure you don't want misunderstandings affecting your job," Victor continued. He did not need to elaborate. Sarah left the office pale and shaken. She had once witnessed her mother endure workplace harassment silently, afraid to lose health insurance. That memory now pressed against her chest. Victor's pattern extended to others. A few female workers began whispering quietly, comparing uncomfortable interactions. None felt safe enough to speak openly. Back at home, the financial strain tightened like a vice. The landlord left a notice about delayed rent. Monica tried negotiating extra time. One evening, Darius returned from another fruitless day and found Monica sitting at the kitchen table with bills spread before her. "How long?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "How long since you stopped working?" The silence answered her. Her eyes widened, not with anger but with hurt. "You've been leaving every morning." "I didn't want you to worry," he said quietly. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "We're already worried." Jaden stood in the hallway, having overheard. The truth settled over the family like heavy snow. Dinner that night was smaller than usual. Rice stretched thin, vegetables portioned carefully. Noah asked for more. Monica kissed his head and promised tomorrow. After the children went to bed, Darius and Monica sat together in silence. The weight between them was not blame, but fear. Across town, Ethan sat at his small apartment desk reviewing the files he had copied. His apartment was modest. One bedroom, mismatched furniture, a stack of engineering textbooks still lining one wall. Snow tapped softly against the window. He scrolled through footage from the week of the locker search. There, late evening, storage corridor. Victor appeared on screen alone. He carried something rectangular in his hand. He paused near the locker row, glanced around, then crouched. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. The angle was partially obstructed, but Victor's movements were deliberate, calculated. Ethan's pulse quickened. He did not yet have full proof, but he had suspicion confirmed. Back at the Coleman home, Monica rested her head against Darius's shoulder. "We face it together," she said firmly. He nodded, though shame lingered behind his eyes. The month had stretched longer than any Darius had ever known, longer than overtime shifts, longer than winter nights, and yet it was only the beginning of understanding how deep the damage had been designed to go. The Cuyahoga River moved slowly beneath a sky the color of worn steel. Ice clung to its edges, and the wind carried the sharp scent of water and rust from the nearby bridges. Cleveland, in late winter, felt stripped bare, trees skeletal, sidewalks cracked and silent. It was the kind of afternoon that made a man feel small against the city's weight. Darius stood near the riverbank, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. His shoulders, once squared by routine and responsibility, sagged slightly now. He had walked for nearly an hour, needing distance from the house. Not from his family, but from the look in Monica's eyes when she realized he had been pretending. He stared at the water, thinking about how quickly a reputation could dissolve. One accusation, one moment of anger, one carefully planted piece of evidence. Footsteps crunched over gravel behind him. Ethan Brooks approached cautiously, his thin frame bundled in a dark winter coat that seemed too large for him. His sandy brown hair peeked out from beneath a knit cap, and his glasses fogged slightly in the cold air. Ethan was not built for confrontation. His strength was quiet persistence. But today, there was something firmer in his posture. "Darius," he called gently. Darius turned, surprised. "What are you doing out here?" Ethan hesitated for a second, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. It looked ordinary, unremarkable plastic, no labels. "I think this belongs to you," Ethan said. Darius frowned. "What is it?" "Footage from the week they searched your locker." The wind seemed to still for a moment. Ethan stepped closer. "I copied internal security files. I wasn't sure at first, but I saw something." Darius's jaw tightened. "Saw what?" Ethan swallowed. "Victor. Near your locker, alone, before the search." The river water shifted against the shore. "You're sure?" Darius asked quietly. "I watched it 3 times, Ethan replied. "It's not crystal clear, but he's there, and he's holding something." For several seconds, Darius said nothing. His mind replayed that night over and over. The accusation, the planted evidence, the word "you people." "You could lose your job for this," Darius said. Ethan gave a small, almost ironic smile. "After what I've seen, that doesn't scare me as much anymore." They stood in silence briefly before Ethan spoke again, his voice lower. "There's more." Darius looked up. "Victor's been using hidden cameras," Ethan said carefully. "Small devices. I think he's recorded some of the women. He's been calling them into his office. I overheard enough to know it's not about performance reviews." Darius's expression darkened. Not with rage, but with recognition. Control, pressure, patterns. "Sarah Whitman," Ethan continued. "She left his office looking shaken. And Carl, security, he knows more than he's saying." Darius exhaled slowly, the cold air visible between them. Why are you telling me this? Because it wasn't just about you, Ethan said. You were the first move. The truth of that statement settled heavily. They decided not to view the file there. Too exposed. Too public. Instead, they walked together toward a bus stop, keeping conversation minimal. Downtown Cleveland still carried traces of afternoon traffic when they arrived near a small internet cafe tucked between a check-cashing storefront and a pawn shop. The cafe was modest, dimly lit, with a flickering neon open sign in the window. Inside, rows of older desktop computers lined the walls. A faint smell of stale coffee lingered. Behind the counter sat Raj Patel, the owner, a middle-aged Indian-American man with a neatly trimmed beard and calm, observant eyes. Raj had immigrated to the United States 20 years earlier and built the cafe slowly from savings and persistence. He believed in minding his own business, but helping quietly when possible. "You need a terminal?" Raj asked politely. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied. They paid in cash. Darius sat at one of the back computers, his large hands slightly unsteady as he inserted the USB drive. The screen loaded slowly. Ethan stood behind him, watching over his shoulder. File names appeared. Time-stamped recordings. Darius clicked the one matching the night before the locker search. The footage opened. Grainy at first. The corridor outside the lockers. Time displayed in the corner. There. Victor walked into frame. Alone. He glanced down both ends of the hallway before kneeling beside Darius's locker. His hand moved deliberately toward the lower panel. Darius leaned closer to the screen. Victor reached inside the locker. The angle obscured details, but his posture left little doubt. Seconds later, he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked away. The timestamp confirmed it occurred hours before the official search. Ethan's breath caught slightly. Darius sat very still. All the humiliation, the arrest, the conviction, the withdrawn complaint, the job loss. Not random, not impulsive. Designed. Darius replayed the footage twice more. Each time, the image burned deeper into his mind. Raj glanced occasionally toward the back, but said nothing. After several minutes, Darius removed the USB carefully and placed it back in his palm as if it were fragile glass. "It's him," he said quietly. "Yes," Ethan replied. For a moment, anger threatened to surge, but Darius forced it down. Anger had already cost him once. Instead, a different clarity formed. "He thought 3 days in jail would break me," Darius said. Ethan nodded. He wanted the record, not the sentence. They left the cafe without speaking much more. Outside, the wind had softened slightly. The river beyond the buildings continued its slow movement, indifferent to human schemes. When Darius returned home that evening, Monica was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing receipts. The house felt smaller lately, as if walls had drawn inward with financial strain. She looked up when he entered. "You were gone longer today." He closed the door gently behind him and walked toward her. For a moment, he simply stood there, weighing how much to say. Then he placed the USB on the table. "What is that?" she asked. "Proof." He told her everything. About Ethan, about the footage, about Victor in the corridor. Monica listened without interrupting, her hazel eyes steady and sharp. When he finished, she leaned back slowly. "So, he planned it," she said. "Yes." "And you were supposed to carry it forever?" "Yes." Silence filled the room briefly, broken only by the heater's uneven hum. Monica reached for his hand. "You're not fighting this alone," she said firmly. Her voice had shifted. The woman who once quietly endured whispers at the market now sat straighter. She had spent her childhood watching her mother navigate injustice alone. She would not repeat that pattern. "What are you thinking?" Darius asked. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that if he's done this to you, he's done worse to others. And if there's proof, We don't hide it." Darius studied her face. Strength had always lived there, but now it sharpened into resolve. "We move carefully," he replied. "Yes," she agreed. "But we move." Upstairs, Jaden lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He had overheard fragments. Proof, video, planned. He did not understand everything, but he sensed change in the tone of his parents' voices. Not fear. Something else. Hope. Back at Riverbend Plastics, Victor sat alone in his office reviewing reports. Snow fell lightly outside the factory windows. He believed the situation resolved. Pressure applied. Target neutralized. He did not know that the river had carried something back, and that a small black USB drive now held the truth he had carefully buried. The wind shifted in Cleveland the week Ethan arranged the meeting. It no longer carried only winter's bite, but something restless beneath it, as if the city itself sensed pressure building. Snowmelt trickled along sidewalks, and gray clouds rolled low over downtown's skyline. Change rarely announced itself loudly. It gathered. Ethan chose a quiet coffee shop near Ohio City for the introduction. The shop was modest but warm, filled with the scent of roasted beans and quiet conversations. At a corner table sat Olivia Grant. Olivia was 34, tall and slender with sharp posture and focused hazel eyes that missed little. Her dark brown hair was cut just below her shoulders, usually tucked behind one ear when she concentrated. She dressed simply. Dark coat, practical boots, leather notebook always within reach. But there was intensity in her presence. Years earlier, Olivia had exposed a city council corruption case that nearly cost her career. She had learned then that truth came with consequences. Since that investigation, she had become careful but relentless. When Darius and Ethan approached, she studied them calmly before standing to shake hands. "You said you had something serious," she began, her voice steady, professional. Darius placed the USB on the table without drama. This was planted. Olivia listened without interruption as Ethan explained how he accessed the footage and what it showed. She asked precise questions, dates, timestamps, internal policies, names of supervisors present that night. "Do you have a copy?" she asked. "Yes," Ethan replied, "multiple." Olivia nodded. "Good. If we move forward, you need backups." Darius leaned forward slightly. "I don't want revenge," he said quietly. "I want my name back." Olivia's gaze softened just slightly. "Then we do this right." Over the next several days, Olivia worked methodically. She verified the metadata on the footage with a digital forensics consultant named Marcus Lynn, a compact, analytical man in his late 20s with close-cropped black hair and an obsession with precision. Marcus confirmed the timestamps were authentic and had not been altered. "That's solid," Marcus said. "If this holds in court, it's damaging." But Olivia knew one video would not be enough. Patterns mattered. She reached out discreetly to several female employees at Riverbend Plastics, including Sarah Whitman. When Sarah agreed to meet, it was in a quiet public park, midday. Sarah arrived wearing a long beige coat, her posture rigid but controlled. Up close, Olivia noticed faint shadows beneath her green eyes. Sleepless nights. Sarah spoke slowly at first, but as she described Victor's private meetings and implied threats, her voice steadied. "He showed me something," Sarah said quietly. "A video clip. Not explicit, but enough. I didn't even know I'd been recorded." Her hands trembled slightly, but her gaze did not break. "Did he demand anything?" Olivia asked. "Compliance," Sarah replied. "Silence." Olivia documented everything carefully. Within days, 2 other women agreed to speak, each story similar. Subtle pressure, implied exposure. Fear. Meanwhile, Olivia investigated Victor's medical claim regarding the assault. She visited the clinic where Victor had been examined. The attending physician, Dr. Leonard Huxley, was a middle-aged man with thinning gray hair and a reputation for efficient documentation. His records indicated minor contusion rather than severe injury. Yet in court filings, Victor's legal statement had described prolonged dizziness and trauma. "Were those additional symptoms recorded?" Olivia asked. Dr. Huxley adjusted his glasses. "Not in my report." The discrepancy was small, but significant. Back at Riverbend Plastics, murmurs began circulating among workers. Ethan noticed Sarah speaking more openly with colleagues. Carl Renshaw's demeanor shifted. He avoided Victor's gaze more frequently. The factory's labor union representative, Thomas Delgado, entered the scene soon after. Delgado was a broad-shouldered man in his early 50s with salt-and-pepper hair and a voice that carried authority without shouting. Having once worked 20 years on the line himself, he believed strongly in worker protection. When rumors of planted evidence and harassment reached him, Delgado requested a meeting with upper management. "We need transparency," he said firmly across the conference table. "If this is true, it's not just one man's problem. It's systemic liability." Management dismissed the allegations at first, but tension rose. Olivia's article was published online on a Thursday morning under the headline, "Factory Manager Accused of Evidence Tampering and Workplace Coercion." The story was comprehensive. It included verified footage stills, testimony from multiple employees, inconsistencies in medical documentation, and a detailed account of Darius Coleman's conviction and subsequent termination. Within hours, the article spread across social media. Cleveland residents began sharing it. Comment sections filled rapidly. Some outraged, others skeptical, many calling for investigation. At home, Jaden sat at the kitchen table scrolling on an old tablet Monica used for market orders. His eyes widened as he read his father's name, not as an accusation, but as a man wronged. "Dad," he called out, voice shaking slightly. "They're saying you were framed." Darius walked over slowly. He did not speak immediately. He watched his son read the article carefully, line by line. For the first time in weeks, Jaden's posture straightened. "You didn't steal," Jaden said firmly. "No," Darius replied. Jaden nodded once, a flicker of pride returning to his expression. At the West Side Market, Monica noticed something different that day. A woman approached her stall and placed money down for 2 pies. "I read about your husband," the woman said gently. "I'm sorry for what you went through." Others followed. Later that afternoon, Olivia arrived at the Coleman home with a small camera crew for a follow-up interview. The cameraman, Daniel Ortiz, a quiet Hispanic man in his early 30s with focused eyes and steady hands, set up equipment discreetly. Monica sat beside Darius during the interview. She wore a simple navy sweater, her posture composed. "What was the hardest part?" Olivia asked. Monica did not hesitate. "Watching my children carry something they didn't deserve." Her voice did not tremble. She described the month of uncertainty, the whispers at the market, the unpaid bills. Darius spoke less but directly. "I made a mistake hitting him, but I didn't deserve what followed." The clip aired alongside the article update. By evening, local news outlets began referencing Olivia's report. Calls for investigation grew louder. Inside Riverbend Plastics, management called an emergency meeting. Victor Hale arrived pale, his confidence fractured. He denied wrongdoing, claiming misinterpretation. But Sarah and 2 other women submitted formal complaints that same afternoon. Thomas Delgado informed management the union would support an independent review. Carl Renshaw requested reassignment from security duties pending investigation. The storm had formed. Online, the article's comment section evolved into broader discussion: workplace harassment, racial bias, corporate accountability. Community leaders demanded transparency. Darius did not celebrate. He remained cautious. "This isn't over," he told Monica quietly. "No," she agreed, "but it's moving." That night, as snow began to fall lightly again, Cleveland felt different. Not lighter, but awakened. Victor sat alone in his office, phone buzzing repeatedly with calls from corporate headquarters. For the first time since orchestrating his perfect pressure, he appeared uncertain. Across town, Olivia updated her notes carefully, preparing for the next phase. But for now, the truth was no longer buried in a locker corridor, it was public. Spring arrived slowly in Cleveland, as if the city itself needed time to believe in warmth again. Snow receded into muddy edges along sidewalks, and the Cuyahoga River reflected a softer sky. Buds began forming on bare branches, small signs of resilience after a long winter. The air no longer cut through coats, it carried possibility. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. 2 investigators from the Cleveland Police Department entered Riverbend Plastics just after 9 a.m., accompanied by a representative from the district attorney's office. Leading them was Detective Laura Mitchell, a tall woman in her early 40s with close-cropped auburn hair and a composed but unyielding presence. Her reputation was built on thoroughness. She did not raise her voice, she built cases. Behind her stood Officer Dana Whitaker, the same officer who had processed Darius weeks earlier. This time, her posture held quiet gravity. Victor Hale was called into the administrative office under the pretense of routine questioning. When Detective Mitchell presented the warrant, charges including evidence tampering, coercion, unlawful surveillance, and falsification of statements, Victor's carefully maintained composure fractured. "I did nothing illegal," he insisted, though his voice trembled slightly. But the evidence was no longer speculation. The surveillance footage had been authenticated. Multiple employee testimonies had been recorded. Medical discrepancies had been documented. Forensic review of internal systems had uncovered unauthorized device installations. Victor was escorted through the same factory floor where he had once exercised unchecked authority. Workers watched silently. Sarah Whitman stood near the quality control station, her chin lifted. There was no triumph in her eyes, only release. The fear that had tightened her shoulders for months began to loosen. Carl Renshaw observed from a distance, his expression conflicted. He had not planted evidence himself, but he had chosen silence. That weight would linger. News spread quickly. By noon, local outlets confirmed the arrest. Later that week, Riverbend Plastics corporate headquarters issued a public statement acknowledging serious internal failures and extending a formal apology to Darius Coleman. The statement was read aloud during a press briefing held outside the factory gates. Standing beside the company spokesperson was Thomas Delgado, the union representative. His presence signaled accountability. The spokesperson, a neatly dressed executive named Allison Pierce, a composed woman in her late 40s with sharp features and corporate polish, spoke carefully. "We regret the harm caused to Mr. Coleman and his family. We are implementing structural oversight reforms effective immediately." Darius stood nearby, hands folded in front of him, not seeking attention. The company extended an offer: reinstatement with back pay and a promotion to production shift supervisor, a position overseeing workflow coordination and safety compliance. When the offer was first delivered, Darius sat at the kitchen table quietly. Monica read the letter twice. "They want you back," she said softly. He exhaled slowly. For weeks, anger had fueled resolve. Now something different guided him: responsibility. "It's not about proving anything anymore," he said. "It's about stability." Monica reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Then take it for us." Jaden, standing in the doorway, listened carefully. The boy who had once lowered his eyes in hallways now stood straighter. When Darius returned to Riverbend Plastics for his first day back, the factory felt changed. Not the machines, not the walls, but the atmosphere. Workers greeted him with nods and quiet respect. Some offered handshakes. Sarah approached briefly. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was calm now, grounded. "For not letting it stay buried." Darius nodded. "It wasn't just about me." Ethan Brooks waited near the break room, adjusting his glasses as usual, but there was confidence in his stance that had not been there before. Corporate leadership had promoted Ethan to Assistant Operations Coordinator, recognition for his integrity and technical diligence. The title mattered less to Ethan than the acknowledgement. "You look official," Darius said with a faint smile. Ethan shrugged. "Feel strange?" "You earned it." Across town, Monica's stall at the West Side Market experienced a different kind of transformation. Customers returned, not out of pity but respect. Some had followed the story closely. Others had simply heard enough to reconsider. Leonard Fisk, the outspoken butcher, leaned across the aisle one afternoon and grinned broadly. "Told you storms pass," he said loudly enough for others to hear. Monica laughed softly. Sales increased steadily. She hired a part-time helper, a college student named Brianna Cole, a petite 19-year-old with curly dark hair and an eager smile. Brianna admired Monica's resilience and often asked about balancing family and work. At school, Jaden walked through the hallway with renewed posture. A classmate who had once whispered now approached awkwardly. "Hey, I read about your dad," the boy said. "That's messed up what happened." Jaden nodded. "Yeah, but he fixed it." When the gifted program coordinator called again, Monica answered confidently. The fee was paid in full. Meanwhile, Olivia Grant received a call from the Cleveland Press Association. Her investigation into Riverbend Plastics had been nominated for a Regional Journalism Award. At the ceremony, a modest event held in a downtown hotel ballroom, Olivia wore a simple black dress and stood composed as her name was announced. The award recognized investigative integrity and community impact. When she accepted, she spoke briefly. Stories matter because people matter, and silence only protects the wrong side. She did not mention Darius by name, but her meaning was clear. Back at Riverbend Plastics, structural reforms were underway. Independent compliance officers reviewed surveillance policies. Anonymous reporting channels were established. Safety protocols were updated. Darius's new role required him to walk the floor differently, not as a line worker, but as a supervisor. He carried a clipboard now, checked schedules, ensured equipment standards. But he never forgot the rhythm of the machine or the fatigue of overtime. He made it a point to address workers by name. One afternoon, he paused near Sarah's station. "Everything running smoothly?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "It feels different." "It should," Darius said. In his office, a modest glass-walled room overlooking the production floor, he placed a framed photo of Monica and the kids on the desk, not as decoration, as reminder. Weeks later, Olivia conducted one final interview with Darius outside the factory gates. Spring sunlight filtered through budding trees. Cameras were minimal this time. "You've been offered recognition," Olivia began. "Do you feel like you've won?" Darius considered the question carefully. "I don't feel like I won," he said slowly. "I feel like we didn't fall." He glanced briefly toward the factory behind him. "This wasn't about pride. It was about survival. About my family. About not letting someone decide who we are." Olivia nodded. "And what would you say to others who face something similar?" she asked. Darius looked directly at the camera. "Truth can be buried for a while," he said, "but it doesn't stay there forever. And no one's worth is defined by someone else's prejudice, not by color, not by rumor, not by fear." Behind him, Riverbend Plastics hummed steadily, but the tone had shifted. Cleveland's skyline reflected in the river that afternoon. Clearer, brighter. The winter had been long, but spring had come. This story is not only about one man being framed and fighting back. It is about how quickly judgment can replace truth in our daily lives. In workplaces, schools, neighborhoods, and even online, people are often labeled before they are heard. A rumor becomes a fact. A mistake becomes a permanent identity. And sometimes, Prejudice hides behind polite words and official titles. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Character is not built in comfort. It is revealed in pressure. Darius did not win because he was stronger than everyone else. He stood firm because he chose integrity over revenge, patience over rage, and truth over silence. In everyday life, we face smaller versions of the same test. When someone is falsely judged, do we speak up or stay quiet? When we see unfair treatment, do we look away or lean in? Silence protects injustice. Courage protects people. There is also another truth. Families matter. Support matters. Monica standing beside her husband. Ethan risking his position to tell the truth. Olivia using her voice responsibly. None of them fought alone. In real life, we must learn to stand for each other. Discrimination, especially racial discrimination, does not disappear on its own. It fades when ordinary people refuse to accept it as normal. This story reminds us that skin color should never determine opportunity, respect, or justice. We are all accountable for the way we treat others. A workplace without fairness becomes a battlefield. A community without empathy becomes divided. But when truth is allowed to rise, restoration becomes possible. So here's the question for you. In your own life, where can you choose courage instead of comfort? Where can you defend someone who cannot defend themselves? Where can you replace judgment with understanding? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of justice and hope can reach more people. Let us build a community that stands for fairness, dignity, and respect. And may God bless every viewer who is fighting a silent battle tonight. May He give strength to those who feel wrongly judged and hope to those who feel forgotten. If you believe that truth always rises and that no family should fall because of injustice, type Amen in the comments. Your voice matters, your support matters, and together we choose a better way forward.